Good morning. Today is Monday, January 11th, 2021. What I'd like to share with you this morning, I have shared before with some of you. It bears repeating. It is something that speaks to us so directly to the moment in which we find ourselves. It's applicable all the time, but just right now, we so much need to hear this. So, in this week's Parsha, Va'era, we begin the plagues, the Makos, that were brought against the Egyptians. In addition to the goal of these plagues in persuading Paro and the Egyptians to let the Jews go free, in addition to that, our sages point out there are multiple layers of lessons in every single one of them. Layers about what we learn about God, and also layers and lessons to teach us how we are supposed to live our lives. And I'll share with you just one. This comes from a sefer called Birchas Peretz. It was written by Rav Yaakov Kanievsky. He was known as the Steipler Rav. He lived in Bnei Brak, a brilliant Talmudic scholar and leader in Bnei Brak in Israel. And here's what he says. We learn the second of the 10 plagues is the plague of the Tsevardeim. When I moved to Quebec, I learned not to use the translation of the word because some people think that it is a negative word. So I don't like to use that word. Before I came to Quebec, I never realized it, but when I came, I realized it. So it's Tsevardeim. They're small, slimy creatures, and you don't want them around. And there were a lot of them, and it was very, very upsetting to the Egyptian people. Listen very carefully to the words of the pasuk. Vayet Aharon es yado al meimei Mitzrayim. Aaron reached out his hand over the waters of Egypt. Vatal hatzvardeya. And the tzvardeya, one, singular, this creature, came out of the water. Vatachas es eretz Mitzrayim. And they covered the land of Egypt. So Rashi quotes the famous Medrash, which points out to the grammatical problem. If in fact Aaron only brought forth one of these little bitty creatures, what do you mean to say it covered all of Egypt? How is that physically possible? Rashi says, Tzvardeya achas hoisa. Aharon brought out of the water by miracle from God one tzvardeya, one single creature. But people didn't like it. V'hayu hamitzrim makin osa. The Egyptians wanted to get rid of this little thing, so they hid it. But every time they hid it, v'hi matezes nachalim. Every time they hid it, instead of killing it, getting rid of it, it divided into 2. And 2 divided into 4. And 4 divided into 8. And within a short while, the entire land of Egypt was covered with these horrible, uncomfortable, disgusting creatures, the Tzvardeya. Says the Steipler Rav. I'll share with you in translation what he says. When the Egyptians saw that hitting the Tzvardeya caused it to multiply, the logical thing would be to stop hitting it in order not to be overrun by these animals. But the characteristic of anger persuaded them just the opposite. That the more there were, the more they had to hit. And the more that they multiplied, the more the Egyptians were consumed with anger, and the more they lashed out and retaliated until the entire land of Egypt was covered with Tsevardeim. And says the Steipler, this is the way it always is with anger. If we would listen and be quiet and not respond when we are provoked, often the situation would calm down. But when we respond in kind, it usually causes an escalation of controversy and harm. Therefore, logically, when we are provoked, we should wait before responding and respond calmly. But our characteristic of anger tells us, are you just going to take it in silence? Fight back! And the other person's characteristic of anger tells him to do the same thing and to respond even more forcefully. And the cycle of destruction continues until the whole land is covered with frogs. I had a friend, unfortunately he passed away, but he was a dear friend. And he once told me, he referred to something that's called the Chartunim syndrome. The Chartumim were the magicians of Paro. And he referred to a Chartumim syndrome because listen to what the pasuk says. After the Torah says that Aaron brought up one of these little creatures and it very soon covered the entire land, the next pasuk, Vayasu kain hachartumim b'lotehem. The magicians of Paro did the same thing with their staffs. Vayalu es hatzvardim al pnei Mitzrayim. And the tzvardim multiplied over Egypt. Of course, the Chartumim of Paro were trying to demonstrate that they were as powerful as whatever force Aharon and Moshe had on their side. Fine, okay. But they're using their force to harm themselves. My friend used to refer to the Chartumim syndrome. They did a miracle. Yes, they could also do a miracle. I talked about this the other day. You can do tricks, you can do miracles, but they did a miracle that made it worse. That's how anger works. It is, our rabbis tell us, mekalkel es ashura. It makes our thinking unsteady. We self-destruct with our patterns of anger. It takes great strength of character. But there is a very simple solution, a simple suggestion to be able to avoid this. And I address myself as I address you. The next time that you're provoked and you start to respond, ask yourself, what I am about to say or do, will it multiply the tzfardeim? That's the question to ask. My friends, I hope that I can hold on to this lesson, and I hope that you can. We certainly need it now in so many areas of life to bring down the anger. Yes, there are serious issues and we can have serious differences of opinion. But when our anger causes us to act in an unreasonable fashion, in a destructive fashion, we need to find the reservoir of strength to hold ourselves back from adding more to the plague. My friends, I wish you a great and peaceful day. And I look forward to seeing all of you soon in person.